Do journalists prioritize politics over human interest stories, and why? We discuss South Africans' relationship with radio in spite of the internet. We follow up on how community radio station Alex FM has picked up the pieces after the July 2021 vandalism. That's our focus this morning. Hello and welcome to Media and Society on SABC News, independent and impartial. My name is Rems Mabote. This is where we look at the intersection between media and the audiences. This show is not complete without your say. Connect with us via your social media channels and share your views and concerns about how the media works and what we feed you. Hashtag SABC Media and Society and call us on 011 714 6841 or 6842. Here's where we start today. If you look at news platforms on any given Sunday, you will find that they're full of stories about politics and politicians. Just look at many of today's papers, for instance. This doesn't mean that there aren't people who have various challenges in their lives in different parts of the country. And it doesn't mean that there are no people who are making various successes in communities outside of politics. So why does the media, or a lot of media, prioritize politics over human interest stories? Let's start with this insight.
To play an important political and social role in society. It ensures that people are aware of the social, economic and political developments taking place around them without any bias. Walimbele, who is the editor of the Sunday World, explains the importance of selecting a headline story.
It's the relevance of the story and the public interest. You determine the impact the story is going to have on your audiences. And then you make a decision. The story does not have to be interesting to you as editor or the journalist who is writing the story.
Media needs to tell us about different aspects of our world and how our lives are affected by politics, the economy, entertainment and environmental factors. But in all this, the human interest story seldom leads.
The media is the watchdog. If it's a watchdog against who? Against what? It's a watchdog against the exercise of power. It's a sort of a role, that is representative of what governments, or representative of the people, about how governments, are actually delivering on the promises, on the policies, because those policies, they're just the custodians of policy. That policy belongs to the people. And you cannot let the government go unchecked, in terms of executing. You'll wonder sometimes why people would say the media is the fourth branch of government. It talks, about the influential role of the media in government. You have your executive, you have your legislature, the judiciary, and informally, the media becomes, the fourth branch of government, the so-called fourth estate. That concept of the fourth estate, everything is about politics, whether we like it or not. Our day-to-day activities are impacted by politics.
Mbele says it is important for politics to mostly lead as it affects huge parts of our lives.
It would be a futile exercise in journalism, to have more focus on human interest or entertainment when those entertainers are affected by politics themselves. Hence I say politics, it actually overshadow quite a lot of aspects of our daily living in society.
In the public's interest, that's what we hear when journalists write their stories. Sometimes there are conversations about what is in the public interest and whether what's in the public interest is determined by journalists. It's not often that you see a story not related to politics and politicians. So is it mostly those stories that are in the public interest, or is the media prioritizing stories on politics? Joining me to discuss this matter is Sifiso Mahlangu, editor of the Star newspaper, and William Bird, the director of Media Monitoring Africa. Remember, you can also be part of this conversation by asking questions to our guests or sharing your views on today's topic by calling us on 011-714-6841 or 714-6842. You can also be part of the conversation on Twitter by using the hashtag SABC Media and Society. Gentlemen, good morning and welcome to Media and Society. Let me start with you, Sifiso. Does human interest, does it still matter in news reporting?
Well, certainly it matters. It occupies page 2 and page 3 of our daily coverage. It's important what actors and musicians do in the country on news on innovation, on human interest story. In journalism, we say when a dog bites a man, that's not a story, but when the man bites the dog, that's the story. So we go through that. We go through the mill every day. But I think my consideration and why personally I go for political stories, often on a daily beat, is because it's the politics and the politicians that are the makeup of our society. It's the politicians that are expected to function or to be the statutes of our constitutional democracy. It is politicians who chow the money that affects those communities. So if another child falls in a pit toilet, to me, it's not just about the child. It's an oversight role. Did the principal not see that this might have happened? Where's the MEC of Education? Where is the minister in that department? Where is the local councillor? Was an oversight ever done? Are there checks happening at the school? How are the parents feeling? So it is important, of course, to cover that human interest story and the tears at home, but to prevent it from not happening again, to look at the role of oversight and accountability, we've got to look at politics and politicians. So not only do they paint a raw picture in this country and sell our newspapers, they also give us the lip, they also give us the quotes that interest us. If you follow Mr. Julius Malema's appearance on the stand against AfriForum in the last week, he gave us some magnificent bites as media, and of course went into the human interest. Sometimes he went into the comedy and the proverbial, but he presented some statute politics, which we love to cover. So I think whilst a human interest still exists and we still have an interest to cover it, for me personally, and the Star, we look for accountability. We look to whom the buck stops, and often that is politics and politicians.
But that is half the story, Sifiso. Example that you just gave about a pit latrine. What happens when the community in that space that you're reporting on are now doing their own effort to fix the pit latrines? They're trying to take the children over rivers to school and stuff like that. That story is another half of the story. The one side is accountability, and I agree with you. But I tend to think that we're missing the other half of people doing things for themselves.
Not exactly, and not at all. A story has got many facets, and a story's got tentacles, and a story grows. So, when you get a story of the child who falls into the pit toilets, which should never happen, you look for the community piece, or what we call the color piece, the communities and some of the reactions. You need to get some visuals and pictures. That's what we do. But the latter, the strength of the story lies in, could this have been avoided, number one, and how to make sure that it never happens again, number two. It's one thing to tell the story of the tears and how that happened and to paint a picture of literature, but newspapers and media, such as the job we and yourselves do, is about current affairs. Yes, we do tell entertainment stories, but we're not an entertainment seller. We're not industry sellers. This is not about entertainment. It's about current affairs. It's about the dollar and the rand. It's about accountability. So I think, whilst we do look at other avenues of the story as it grows, for us, the crunch is whose head should be on the block here? Why did this happen? How could it have been avoided? And who needs to take the fall for that? Following that story can be stories of other regions, other people, how the parents are feeling, what the neighbors have said, commentary from neighbors or school kids or the school governing body, the colors they wear, and then of course, as you see with news channels in this country, they'll follow it up to the funeral. But that is only allowed to happen. That only happens because we have covered the base of the story. We've covered the when, the where, the how, and the why. And that's the grind, the backbone of the story. Everything goes to there. The flesh and the hair anybody can put on. But we must be able to tell the reader, the listener and the viewer, the four elements of journalism: where, who, why, and how.
Okay, William, let me bring you in here. Are human interest stories important, and why are they important?
So look, I think that William Belle in that insert talked about media as holding the powerful to account. And that's key, because that tells us, it gives us a sense of why that matters in the news agenda, and why it pretty much looks very similar around the world in terms of the convention we have of what makes the most headline news. So if the president speaks, almost regardless of which country you're in, that is going to make the news, because that person is the head of state, it's the person who has a lot of power politically, economically, etc., and socially. And that then tends to make that news agenda, whether or not it's almost immaterial to what that person has to say. So that kind of sets that agenda. But I think that what's interesting to me about this is that human interest element is the flip side to the same story very often. And I think one of the reasons we're seeing people having less interest a lot in many of the political stories is because we're failing to make, as the media, that connection between what's happening, that story that we're seeing, that story of corruption, for example, and what it means and how it impacts people in a very real and material fashion. If you talk to most of our people, this idea of R1 billion, how much is R1 billion? I don't know. It's not something that in my economic climes I can begin to understand how much that money that really is. And so when you talk about those things in an abstracted thing, that this person stole this or this person has got this much money, it's very difficult to make sense of. But bring that down and you start to bring in a human interest element to that how it impacts people and what the real effect and impact of corruption, for example, is. It means that in this community, because they stole the money for basic things like building the roads, there's just potholes. And what does that mean in a material sense? It means that not only is it bad for the vehicles to drive along, but it means that if there's an emergency and someone's dying, it takes the ambulance or emergency services that much longer to get there. If there's no services, if their roads aren't clearly marked, etc., it means your fire services can't get to put out fires when there's a fire. And that's why, you see all of these things in informal settlements. Fires just go completely out of control, and there's no sense and there's no ability for people to get there. So that's the very real consequence of corruption, right? But when you talk about it in a political sense, it's very unlikely that you're going to then start to see that very real human-centered angle to it. And I think that part of the challenge of social media is that it's forcing our media to say, hang on a minute, we have to find a bit of a better balance between just the politics and how it impacts people in a very real sense.
My next question would have been, William, who let the dogs out? But I'm going to take a break. And after this break, we'll continue this conversation. Thanks for staying with us on Media and Society. We continue the discussion with my guest, Fiso Mahlangu, editor of the Star newspaper, and William Bird, the director of Media Monitoring Africa. Remember, you can also be part of this conversation by asking questions to our guests or sharing your views on today's topic by calling us on 011-714-6841 or 6842. William, rather, let's take a call first. We've got Mr. September calling us from Cape Town. Lester, good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm dark and lovely, mate. How are you?
I'm very well. Not too bad. Not too bad. I'm very interested in your human interest stories over politics. I think it bears relevance. If I may just jump into it quickly, I'm the deputy chair of the Greater Cape Town Civic Alliance, and I'm also the chair of the Forum of Cape Flat Civics. And we have, for many years, struggled to get our interest stories actually published in both print and in terms of the television side of things, in terms of the media. For example, apartheid spatial planning is something that I've written on in particular, and how that affects even service delivery. For example, the further you live from the inner city, which is a natural flow of apartheid spatial planning, the lower the levels of service delivery that you will find. In fact, the worse the levels of service delivery you will find. In Cape Town, we were disappointed, for example, to see that the levels of service delivery wasn't even covered before the elections or the run-up to the elections as prominently as elsewhere. And that just again shows what we are struggling with, because Cape Town is also painted by the media sometimes as, this perfect place, and I also believe that has got to do with a political agenda, and it doesn't really look at what people are faced with on the ground. And that to us is a major concern, where the politics seems to be overriding the human interest.
Excellent, Lester. Thank you very much for that point.
Thank you.
William, is it our fixation? Can we face the truth? Is it our fixation as the media with politics, and we force feed that to public because we have decided that is more important?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that to a degree, obviously, journalists and editors will determine what is said and what and necessarily what gets left out. I think part of the issue is that we've got so many issues and things happening in South Africa at any one point. It's just about impossible to cover everything. In addition to that, all of our newsrooms have got massively depleted resources, so there are fewer and fewer journalists to cover more and more things. And what that means in reality is that if there's a big story that you've been following that is a lot easier to follow, Sir Fiso Mahlangu mentioned it earlier in relation to Julius Malema. That's a great story. It's an easy story to cover. He's in court. It's all the live recordings. He's going to give you some excellent sound bites. That's a lot easier to do than it would be to go and, as your caller, I think his name was Lester, was saying earlier, to actually go out to wherever those communities are. Go and find out, what are these issues? When you talk about these service delivery issues that you've got, what is it there, and how do we make that into something that's going to become a relevant angle for all of our audiences, for all of the people across South Africa? So for SABC, they need to go there and say, right, what's the public mandate interest of this, and how do we make it relevant, and what's the issue here? It can't just be, well, the roads are in appalling condition, or they're not collecting the rubbish. These are things that we all know. It's not necessarily meets that criteria for news. So part of it is about the kind of practical realities. A lot of it is about helping to keep power and hold it accountable. But as I said, I think a lot of it is the flip side of the same coin. If you look at that thing, we've mentioned the child falling down the pit latrine. Michael Kumape was his name. The one that story sticks with us. And it sticks with us not just because it's a tale of failed service delivery, which is what it fundamentally is. At its heart, that's what it is, right? Failed basic service delivery to that school. But what sticks with us is the fact that it was about a little boy whose life was ended, and it ended in one of the most unimaginably awful ways. And that's the angle that I think that we need to be finding to sort of start to bring that mix and bring that issue of this is the big politics and this is why it matters. Yes, and it's very important and very critical, but this is why these things matter, and this is how they impact all of us on a very human person-to-person level.
Sfiso, I truly appreciate what William has spoken about. Budgets are very important. I do this thing in studio. It's much more affordable to do it here than to go out and capture stuff. I do get that. Aren't we, though, as the media, at the risk of being spun by politicians because we have shown over-importance in them that they now feed us stuff that we think is important?
You know, we've got a very abusive relationship with politicians in South Africa. And politicians love the media when we report on them well, and they hate the media when we don't. But it becomes slightly easier for the media to cover politicians sometimes because they'll send us press release after press release. They'll send us a statement. Sometimes they'll send us pictures. They'll send us links. They'll send us information. They'll tell us where a subject matter, where a story is unfolding. And we don't have that with communities. So sometimes you've got to become very investigative. You've got to go into communities. Itumeleng Mafisa, who's an incredible journalist with the Star, broke into a child abuse syndicate in Soweto, in a place called Tsepiso. And when we discovered how many children were being abused there, I mean, it was unthinkable, but it required a lot of time, a lot of resources, not something that he got from a press release. It's not something he could just write in an hour and republish. It took weeks of investigative journalism. It took weeks of consultations and talks and calls and emails with the social welfare department, social development, the Department of Health, interviewing communities and neighbors until this crash was shut down. We couldn't have done that from a press release. So whilst I do agree that maybe we cover politics so much because it seems a little bit easier, they give us better sound bites. You can do the story earlier as opposed to easier. But there is certainly work to be done in community work. And of course, politicians like to be covered. They like to be on the front pages of newspapers.
That's their oxygen.
Because that's their office, right? Yeah. And populism sells, so they really want that. So I think for us as editors, it's finding a great mix, a good composition to say, let's cover what builds the state, what builds this democracy, but let's also make sure that we try and raise enough resources and time and give reporters time, give journalists time to break into those stories. The other thing, and I think William Bird might have mentioned this, is the issue of time and timelines. Newsrooms, as you know, work on deadlines, very stringent deadlines. And so, because of those and depleted newsrooms, particularly because of COVID-19, reporters don't find the necessary time to travel into those communities, spend a lot of time there, find out on the facts they would have alternatively, and maybe sometimes they cover what is easiest. But with the right backing, the right type of resources, the right type of support, which I think we should have, we should support journalists to go out there and dig up the stories that matter and not just, rehash press releases. From us, certainly we've banned all press releases, whether from politicians or not. We need to find the story. We want to go out there and see it for yourself.
Let me come in here, Siso.
Take your word for that.
Let me come in here. So, in July last year, during what happened in July, I met a gentleman in Bedfordview, and he told me he lived in Vosloorus, which is about maybe 15 kilometers from Bedfordview. And he told me that because of what happened in that period, he now spends money to go get his money from the ATM when he used to walk to the nearest ATM. And I thought, I'm not hearing these stories. And leading up to local government elections, we saw many stories about potholes, dilapidating infrastructure, a lack of service delivery. But do you find that sometimes we miss an opportunity to cover more of these stories on the ground?
Well, I think absolutely. And COVID-19 has not assisted us because of depleting newsrooms. It hasn't assisted us because of budgets and circulations and sales and all of that. And it's not been easy I think, for any newsroom in the Republic. And I think in all of the world, whether it's print or digital. I think it's perhaps better with digital across the world, but there's been some serious impact. We need those stories from ordinary public, from ordinary members of the public. We need to be able to articulate those stories. And you make a point about the elections. It shouldn't just be at election season. I mean, with election season, we are made aware of everything that's going wrong or right in our society. And suddenly the coverage stops when the politicians go back home or get into parliament or get into their various locations in the municipalities. That coverage, I think, should continue every single time. We at the Star have got a Metro page or Metro pages. The Metro pages are like the elections pages. Every single story of this Metro gets covered, whether it's rubbish, whether it's massive potholes, collapsing buildings. They focus on the Metro page, and I think that should continue post-election season.
We got a caller from Mpumalanga. Jones, good morning.
Good morning, my brother.
Yes, sir. We all ears.
Yeah, straight to the point, my brother. This is in front of me. Tuesday, February 20, 1996. That's the Sowetan copy, the front page. Now, Ramakhodi, by that time, takes tough standing. During this Potgieter's Ras primary school, where they didn't want to see a blackface African child. Now, the latest is that the recent story, the last week's story, in Randfontein. Why don't we get this? Why don't we just get the strong journalism that can give us the right story, that can go to all the provinces? In fact, now I'm talking about investigating journalism. Go to all these provinces, the small dopey, the so-called the small dopies, and find out how is this attitude in these small dopies, especially the lower schools, the primary schools, in this Potgieter's Ras, maybe the Biladina, and I'm talking about in short where the apartheid is still strong. Can we just go and pick the story? Number two, the ESCOM issue. We just brush this thing on top. Can't we just get the cameras roll and show us, hey man, we've got this problem with the generator number one. We've got this problem with the generator number two. We don't get deep into details of the story. We just brush them on top. That's my worry.
Thank you, Jones. Thank you very much, my brother. William, in my next segment after our conversation, we're dealing with radio and the growth of radio in the past few years. And I'm going to still on that conversation with you and say, isn't that the reason why radio keeps on growing? That they actually cover human interest stories. Why would 8 million people listen to Ukhozi every day when they don't cover politics as much as everybody else does? Could that be the trick, that we're missing on what people are really interested in?
Sure, I think that there's a very different relationship that radio has to television audiences, and that radio feels a lot more personal. You've got a lot greater level of ownership of your local radio station. You feel like it's my station. I know the presenters because they're with you in your home while you're making your food and you're doing all sorts of things. They're in your car with you when you're driving. They hear you even if they don't. And it's a lot easier often to communicate. So those things tend to be a little bit easier. If you look at their news, though, you'll find that their news diet doesn't actually differ that much from television's news diet. And so I think, just to sum up, I think part of what we need to be seeing is a shift in focus from understanding that it is about the big politics. And yes, news and media are there to hold a powerful account, but they're also there to give voice to the voiceless. Part of the work that we've been doing, for example, with UNICEF, you look at child rights governance. Children are 5% of our population. They're about 10% of our media coverage. we need to be understanding how these things impact democracy. Because if we don't do that, all of the stories that we do, ultimately they start to undermine what we're actually trying to do as media in terms of giving people a full, diverse picture of all of the people and all of the stories that are happening in South Africa.
Sfiso, here's my final question to you. And could it also be the fact that we know politics matters, we know it drives our lives every day, but the fact is we also battle with the fact that we are political citizens ourselves or animals ourselves? And I've got only 30 seconds for that answer. I'm sorry I do that to you. That's journalism, isn't it?
Yeah, no, we're political beasts. Journalists are political thinkers, political writers. Society is political. And of course, we tell stories that people also want to hear. Journalism, as I said before, is a good mix of telling stories that people want to hear and people need to hear. And certainly, whilst they need to hear about politics, they also enjoy it. But it's a good mix. We've got to dash it really well. Often on the rocks, we've got to dash it really well.
And final word from you, William?
I like the idea of politics and dashing it on the rocks. I think that we need to see a closer understanding of political stories and human interest and see that they're different sides of the same coin. And we need to shift that approach. If people are no longer interested in those, if we're losing audience because of that, we need to understand that we need to make them relevant to people and give voice to the voiceless.
Sfiso Mahlangu, editor of The Star newspaper, and William Baird, director of Media Monitoring Africa. Thank you very much, gentlemen. When we come back, we look at the growth of radio in spite of the internet making a big inroad elsewhere. Welcome back. You're still with us on Media and Society, and I'm Rams Mabote. TheConversation.com says there are about 80% of South Africans who still listen to radio. What's clear is that South Africans mostly listen to indigenous language radio. About 8 million are on Ukhozi, with over 5 million on Umhlobo Wenene. Gagasi FM is a private station with most listeners, and the Durban-based station is bilingual station. That's very important. We went out to the public to find out about the importance of radio, and this is what they had to say.
I listen to radio because usually radio is the source that I can get easy information every day and every time, anytime I want.
The reason why I listen to radio is because I'm trying to get a lot of information considering what's happening around the world. And as a student and a learner, there are some things which I need to know. So listening to the radio, it helps me to get a bit of information about what's happening around us, what's happening in the community.
I listen to radio because there are so many information I get from radio. Like ziningi information about kwenzakalani ezweni, phesheya kwenzakalani, weather as well, everything. The radio is number one for me.
The importance of listening to the radio is keeping yourself up to date. For example, I'm also stressing that because I'm going to be on radio tonight, am I going to have enough audience to listen to me, because I'll be asking for help via the radio.
Like maybe come on kare gone ya no re patela dishi a wa patela dishi so gona le radio ka mo ntlong o khona o utlwa dilo tse dintse e leng gore di a etsagala tse e leng gore o paletse go di sheba ko TV.
Remember that you can also be part of this conversation by asking questions or sharing your views on today's topics by calling us on 0117146841 or 6842. You can also be part, by the way, on Twitter, social media, by using the hashtag SABC Media and Society. Maybe you can actually tell us about your favorite radio station and your relationship with radio. I will tell you mine later. To discuss South Africa's love for radio is Jacob Mchanga, the head of the Radio Academy at the University of the Witwatersrand. Mkazi, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us and for missing church, the first part of church, but I'm going to release you soon. Do South Africans really listen to online radio or podcasts, or we lie to ourselves?
I I think the answer to this question starts here, Rams. The problem, if we start looking at podcast or online radio as an alternative to traditional radio, and I think that's where the problem starts. If you look at at podcast, online radio, and all those other things, for me, they actually there to actually complement traditional radio. So it's not like people are actually leaving radio to actually go for online and podcast spaces. So I think that's where the answer is.
I'm going to use a very bad word. I don't like this word, but what is the obsession with traditional radio that South Africans have? I don't think it's obsession, but I'm going to use the word obsession.
I think the question you put to William Bed earlier on, whether radio covers human interest stories more than print and other forms of media. The obsession, if I may also use your word, it's mainly because there is more human touch with radio. There is more human touch with radio. Radio is with you everywhere you go. It's easy for you to choose when and how to listen to radio. You don't have to stop what you are doing and get information from radio. So, what I also see with public, commercial, and community radio stations is that what radio is doing is actually trying to balance, both, the urban and the rural lives. And in that way, it becomes easy for the audiences to get, the different aspects of lives. So the obsession is actually based on that. You are able to get news update. You are able to get, all the information. You are able to get your music. And also, radio is live. You are able to interact with it as it happens.
Radio grew substantially in the last 2 years during COVID. Could we also be lying to ourselves that it was just the love of radio, but not focusing on the fact that all of us were stuck at home, not going out, and therefore we're dialing our tunes to the radio stations we like?
It was for the love of radio, Raps. I'll tell you why. Because even if you look before COVID, radio was still growing. It was steadily up there, unlike maybe other forms of media like print, for instance. There've been concerns that there is, decline in terms of audiences, people reading, print and all the stuff like that. Radio has always been there. It's not because we're stuck at home. It's mainly because radio was able to give us what we need most. So there was even a more intimate relationship that developed between us as audiences and radio during COVID-19. And I think many radio stations across the 3 tiers of broadcasting, they were able to give the audiences what they want and what they expected during times of COVID. And I think that's why radio, kept on growing. Actually, even in South Africa, it is said that it actually grew larger than the global average, which is something very encouraging, for radio business in South Africa. What I like personally is the fact that the growth of radio is not only in terms of the big radio stations, even with the community radio sector, there is a growth of listenership there.
But there's another truth, Mkazi. Cost of data. For me to choose to go online is because I can afford it. Could it be another factor? I mean, one of the people we spoke to out there mentioned imaletisha iko. It's a reality. So I can switch on the radio and not pay a cent.
Yeah, true. Very true. Very true. And also, radio is easily accessible compared to other these forms of platform. It's cheap. It's everywhere, even deep rural. It doesn't have to compete with some, issues like, for instance, technical accessibility and all those kind of things. Even if you don't have electricity, as long as you have batteries, you can actually access radio. Yes, that is true. Unfortunately, it's not the radio's problem that other forms of media are expensive compared to radio. I think the good thing as South Africans is that we are able to get this form of media like radio that is able to give us all the information, the education that we need and everything that we need, despite the challenges, the financial challenges that we sometimes face ourselves, where we have to choose between buying bread and paying for the dish.
Some print magazines, newspapers even tried to go online, but they couldn't make it. They still died, and so people are saying because of the internet. I'm saying, but some of them tried to use the internet to stay alive. Something is amiss there.
I think, radio got it well in that, radio people, they didn't look at the internet as like a panacea for all the solutions that they're facing. What radio did with the internet and other forms like podcasts and all those kind of things was to actually embrace the space. So what was happening was that they were able to package content on those platforms, but still stick to traditional radio as the main means of engaging with the audiences. I think in that way it works very well. And honestly speaking, if there is any radio station that has not embraced internet, and other forms of digital communication, that radio must start now coming up with a plan to embrace internet, to make sure that there is repackaging of content to those platforms, but still keep to radio traditional broadcasting as the main means of engaging with the audiences.
Let's take a call. I think the name is Choma from Orkney. Choma from Orkney.
Hey, Amrana, Kadmen.
Khotso is.
Hey, Rada and Tatuakas.
Ralebo, Remamits.
Hey, Shevan Nantati, Gerata Radio Haholo, you would see to a radio Soto. Hey, any radio Soto, Kanakoni Radio Bantu, Yavita Radio Soto, Honey or the KDS. Haululu into the current affairs. So, Momana Ione, Honale Nano Legitani Makapate, Lamutiar Leganaka Telephone, a Roma Kumani saying Akenakabo 5. A Roma Toso Mantua, Akenakabo 6, Aitaka 7, a Roma Tunita, Matunita Akenaka Jinka Weekend, Akenaka 6.
Ke hotse tsaka wena lena ke ke mamela radio Sotho ke tseba se botla le gelebane na re tsa dipisa ba funto tseno kaofela empa hobane e ka ba ha ona TV ka se mamela radio the whole day ntate
ya ke mamela radio mo ona mo ntse go blela teng re ke mamela ka television go tswa mo e be ba lena ne ola le tsamaisang ke batho khala le party lena le bitswang into monate show so man ke di budi tsaka tsa khale ke ntate Chomane mo ntate ke fuwe mo gobane kwana khale le bo mema makgetha le bo tlhapani mafitonyana ha o tla motla ya bolo na ha tsa bola ha monana
ke le buile a go ntate
ke le wa mfombe.
And Jake, that for me is magic. Here's a human being. Orkney is not a rural town. Because I was going to ask you about rural-urban relationship. It's not a rural town. It's in the urban areas, maybe peri-urban, and still chooses radio, still finds relevance in radio over and above anything else. I mean, I'm flattered that he's watching TV now. He's not listening to radio.
Well, it's only going to be for this Media and Society show that he will go back to radio. You know, your point, Rams, that you can't listen to radio the whole day. Actually, people can. Or at least 95% of their time, because with radio, it's easy. Everywhere you go, I can go to the loo, radio will be with me. I can't take TV with me to the loo and all those kind of things. So, radio is very important. I was raised by Radio Zulu. I remember my grandmother, for instance, would take the battery and put it up there.
To charge it,
so that you can actually charge, so that you can listen. But the other good thing about radio, it's how it's able to balance the different radio programming formats. For instance, the caller spoke about current affairs, but there's also other interesting thing with radio. There's drama. People love drama because it's able to reflect on the different aspects of their lives. You can be in a position to package multiple programming formats on radio. The other important thing with radio at the present moment is that you don't have to be stuck with one radio. In a space Rams of 10 minutes, I can actually listen to 3 radio stations because I can get what I want from here. When they play something that I don't like, I can move to the next radio station. And I think this freedom able the ability to choose from the different radio stations to get what we want is able to help radio. Because even if you hop from one radio station to the other, the important thing is that you are still within the space of radio.
I have to ask you one last question. Are we going to get to a point where it's so easy to go onto your phone, go onto your tablet and watch a podcast or something like that, and that could affect radio? Do you think we're going to get to that point?
I don't think we'll get to that point where podcasts affect radio. It won't. It won't, because what is happening with radio at the moment is that radio is embracing podcast. Radio is able to repackage different content, into bits and pieces on podcast platform. It won't get to the point whereby if you are on podcast, it's affecting radio listenership. Instead, it will grow radio, because what you'll get on podcast, it will be a small package of it, and then you'll go back to radio to get more of it. So what is going to happen, whether on your phone or anywhere you are with podcast and all these other platforms, what it will do to you, it will still lead you to radio, because radio will be in a position to give you more. It will also be in a position to give you those human interest stories, the more human touch, to radio. It will keep you company. You will be in a position, to interact. Social media, for instance, some people are saying, if you are, social media is, is eating up on radio listenership. It's not. It's complementing radio. It's actually making radio even more stronger, because what you get on social media platforms, you'll get, bits and pieces of it, but then you go to your traditional radio and get more of it. So it should always be a growth of radio. So what is happening on podcast and all these other platforms is contributing to the growth of radio. What is going to happen, radio listenership is going to be more and more, double, triple, yeah.
I now know why you're going to enjoy church later, Jake. Thank you very much, Jacob Nchangas, the head of the Radio Academy at the University of the Witwatersrand. After the break, we discuss South Africa's, or we're not going to take a break, we're going to discuss radio, we're going to discuss, now let's look at the impact of July 2021 in the media. Besides business and government property, an unusual victim of that unrest was several community radio stations. We did it here last year. Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal, Alex FM, Mamelodi FM, Westside FM, as well as Intokozo FM in KZN, were attacked and looted, suffering damage worth hundreds of thousands of rands. We revisited Alex FM to find out how the station has picked up the pieces after the July 2021 vandalism. Please, let's take a look at this.
After 27 years of existence, Alex FM was forced to be off air due to the 2021 July unrest that affected most businesses in some parts of KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng. This was seen as an attack to the media when thugs broke into the station and stole the equipment. Alex FM station manager Takalani talks to us about the fateful day.
I went through the offices, went to the studio, all our equipment was gone. It was just vandalized, the papers were everywhere. So yeah, those were the scenes of the 18th of July.
But the biggest loss was the right to information for audiences of this community radio station. Listeners have been left desperate without their source of news, information and entertainment.
Look, it had a very bad impact, because we are the voice of the community. So you can just imagine what happens when you silence that voice of the community in the form of Alex FM, because the people of the Greater Alexandra, they rely on Alex FM as their only source of information and content distribution in the Greater Region E. That will be a source that will talk about the issues of the people of Alexandra. So it had an impact because it threatened the existence of the station.
Takalani says the station was off air only for a few hours, thanks to donations received from various companies and media personalities.
Colleagues from the industry, from your SABC, other commercial stations, if I can mention them, like your 702, your Kaya FM, your Power FM, they came in for us because they offered help to work around the clock to get the station back on air. So we are housed at LM Radio Studios in Sandton, Rivonia. and then technical guys from Jacaranda FM, Kaya Power, they came through, they helped us to reconnect the station to be on air. So after 9 hours, we're back on air, we're able to broadcast, but from a different location. So we're housed at that location for about 3 weeks as we are rebuilding this site, and then after 3 weeks, we're back, and obviously with the donations that we have received, because everything that we had, everything that we owned, everything that we accumulated over a period of 27 years was gone within a split of a second.
He says it is now business as usual.
You know, operating, we have 2 fully functional studios, but previously we had 4. So obviously we still need more assistance to, you know, acquire those studios, but there are donors that we are still waiting on them. They've promised us to come and, you know, install those studios and other equipment that we might be missing. But one can say we are 95% fully operational. It's back to business as usual. We continue to do what we do best, which is to serve the community of the Greater Alexandra with content and information at all material times.
Community radio bridges the gap between officials and the community. Thus, it is extremely important for people in these communities to be informed about what is happening in their areas, as it allows them to formulate informed opinions.
The importance of radio, and particularly community radio, it serves as a platform of engagements. It serves as a platform that we can utilize to find solutions to our problems. It also serves as a platform where we can use it to hold the executive to account.
What a beautiful, positive story to end with. Thank you very much for watching and participating on Media and Society on the SABC News channel. Independent and impartial. From me, Rams Mabote, and the team, goodbye and God bless.